And hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and wow, it's been a busy week. Busy. Let me do a screen share for those of you who are watching on YouTube, and for everybody else that's listening on the radio, they can go to my YouTube channel, Rob Skiba. Just look up my name, Rob Skiba. And this week I posted my presentations from the Flat Earth International Conference, parts 1 and 2. So those are up now if you want to see them, if you haven't already. And I just put up some behind-the-scenes stuff. I'm real excited to be able to do that now, to take the various things that I'm doing with the team in South Africa and start documenting it. Mornay Tennyson out there, he went and did an interview with Edward King, who is our composer, and got some cool shots in the studio there. So I put that together in a behind-the-scenes, working on the music video. It's about 20 minutes long, and I also put up another one today, behind the scenes, working on sound design with another guy named Mornay, both of which I am extremely happy with. They are doing some really good work for us, and I'll be putting up some more behind-the-scenes stuff very soon. Probably at least one or two more before I head to South Africa. I'm actually leaving next week to go there and to start working with the actors and doing motion capture and all kinds of stuff. So really excited about that. And also finally got the comic book done. I'll probably release the PDF version of it first and get that out there, and then get the files over to the printer so we can get them printed. I'm going to actually start off with a limited collector's edition first, and do probably a run of about 500 of the limited collector's edition to try to recoup some of the funds that the money that I spent to get it made, so I can start paying them for part 2. They're actually already working on the second issue, and they're coloring page 2 right now as we speak. So I'm expecting that probably in the next day or two to be completed, and then they'll be starting on issue number 3. So that's what's been going on with me and with Seed, and now I'm going to bring on my guest, Zen Garcia. Are you there, sir?
I am, brother, and very exciting, all of what you have going on, and it's nice to see aspects of it coming to completion and other aspects of it just beginning to bear fruition. So love when a project comes to completion like that.
Yeah, me too. It's been a long time coming, and by the way, I want to thank all my supporters. You guys are the ones that made it happen. Thank you. Thanks so much for all your contributions, whether small or great. It all counts. So thank you to all of you who have believed in us, believed in this project, going all the way back 10 years. It's 10 years this month, 2009, November. So yeah, it's very exciting to get started in that, and it's also very exciting to continue our study that we're doing this evening in the book of Genesis, although I think we're going to be shifting out of Genesis, if I remember right. We finished up...
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Let me do a screen share here. We were in Genesis chapter 5. Before we jump into that, did you have anything else you wanted to share with anybody, or do you want to just jump in?
No, I think we covered a lot with regard to the genealogies and the two different bloodlines, and so I think we're right at that point where it would be perfect to enter into Jasher, especially for those that are not familiar with the story of Enoch, the prophet within it. It's a great place to open into Genesis 6, and because that was all going on during his time. So.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, Sheila had an interesting insight. We were talking about last week's show and how it was in the days of Enos that they began to worship the stars.
Yes.
And to consider the stars as gods. And we were kind of speculating, like, maybe that's the reason for Genesis 6, is if they were just worshiping orbs in the sky and, there were no interaction with beings yet at this point, physical beings. They were just looking up there and seeing what Jude calls the wandering stars, and maybe perhaps that's when they began to wander. That would be an interesting study to look into, and see if anything was happening in that regard. But regardless, they were worshiping the stars, and presumably the wandering stars, because those are the ones throughout ancient history and multiple cultures became known as sentient beings.
Yes.
We know them most familiar with the Greek mythology, Jupiter being the Roman version of Zeus, etc. And that, okay, so if they're worshiping the stars, maybe the fallen ones, because we know that Satan had already fallen by this time and 1/3 of the angels had followed him, that may have been the opportune time for them to say, what if we could manifest ourselves here on earth and create demigods and offspring that people would worship as, physical beings. And so interesting speculation that maybe that's why Genesis 6 happened. Any thoughts on that?
I absolutely do believe that is part of the whole process. And I even think it goes back further to as we were talking about what Christ said of Satan falling like lightning from heaven, and that Enoch in the second book of Enoch speaks of this as happening on the second day, that during the antediluvian times, even with the pre-Adamites, there was the establishment of the worship of the feathered serpent, and that they also incorporated into the worship of the stars, the luminaries, and different phenomena like the eclipses and things of that nature, as the Mayans did, where they cut the hearts out of the victims in offering to the sun, and to continue harvest, that they perform such abominable ritual and even child sacrifice and things of that nature. So I think that the roots of it go back even to that time, but certainly did manifest and establish itself amongst current modern humanity during the time of Enoch. But there's nothing new under the sun. Going back to ancient times, to Atlantis and all of that, I believe that it's the same kind of worship that the fallen angels, as those kind of sentient beings and the wandering stars and those titles that they give unto themselves, that they were establishing themselves in worship and diverting worship even back then. And just like with what we see of Sisera and the stars fighting against him, that it has to have been in some manner angelic forces or angelic beings that took part in, and that the allusion to that it only makes sense that again, it would be these, not the stars, but these angelic beings that were assisting in that battle as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Somebody in this chat room is like, love listening to me, but I draw the line when so-called angels came to Earth and had sex with humans to reproduce half human and half angels. Totally non-biblical. I love these guys.
Goodness. Yeah, right.
First of all, you're in the minority, historically speaking, bro.
Mm-hmm.
For well over 4,000 years, the unanimous worldwide view was the angelic view. Everybody in the world, whether they called them angel or not, they were talking about beings that came from above, that came down. You're completely bogus and entirely unsubstantiated. Sethite view didn't even show up until about 160 years after Christ, or at least AD, with Julius Africanus, and even then it didn't really catch on until the time of Calvin. Now, unfortunately, it's what's taught in seminaries everywhere, so our pastors are just mimicking it. But you have to ignore, and we talked about this in previous broadcasts, you have to ignore a mountain of historical and archaeological evidence to dismiss the angelic view.
Right. The reality of it, I mean, is found everywhere. Evidence of it is found everywhere. The skeletons of giants, the hybrid race that was produced from that incursion and that interaction, you have to ignore all of that. I mean, it's insurmountable, the evidence. So,
yeah,
but people can choose as they want.
Yeah, people can believe what they want to. But speaking of the evidence, after our show last week, I decided to crack open that Solomon mystery, the Mysteries of Solomon Island, or Solomon Island Mysteries, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I'm only about like 50 or 60 pages into it, but wow.
Yeah.
Man. Oh my goodness. That book is wow.
Yeah.
I basically, just in the 60 or so pages that I've read, I've got enough story material to like write
Right.
seasons of Seed.
Exactly.
Just
Exactly.
for the few pages that I've read.
Right.
And it appears that that person's, the person wrote that book or published it anyway in 2009, but the experiences that he was writing about appeared to have been at the beginning of the 21st century, so early 2000s. So
Right.
I mean, we're talking about very recent historical, documentation. And boy, it's very tempting to want to just go out there to the Solomon Islands, and he said that you can talk to anybody on the island. Just pick a random stranger on the street and ask them, about the giants, and they'll all
Right.
have stories. Like
Yeah, they all know. Yeah.
he says we talk about Bigfoots, Sasquatch sightings and stuff like that around here, but there it's apparently a very regular occurrence. And what freaked me out, man, was I didn't know the details. All I knew was that there were giants in the Solomon Islands, and there were fairly recent testimonies to show for it. That's about all I knew, and I thought, okay, cool. And I wanted to set the beginning of Seed in the World War II time frame, because so much happened to World War II
Right.
from that time forward to culminate in what I call the Omega Plan, Last Days, and all that stuff. And of course, now with our understanding of biblical cosmology, that's the same time period right after World War II that the big cover-up started. So that was my motivation for writing the teaser. And in the teaser, when I was trying to figure out, okay, I have to choreograph this dogfight, where does the plane crash? And this was my only thinking was that the way the island is situated, I wanted them to be able to look out the left window and see the sunset. Well, of course, if you're going to do that, then you have to be traveling north, right? Well,
Right.
the island is more or less an east-west oriented island, but there's a portion of it that kind of tilts up towards the north, so it's like a north-northwest tip of the island. And so I thought, okay, this is my only reason for locating it there. Was like, okay, I needed an area for the airplane to make a right-hand turn and be situated such that they could look out the left window and see the sunset. That was my only thinking. And then they get into this dogfight, and then they crash, and then I was like, okay, where does he crash? So I was looking for a river area for him to do a crash landing in. So I picked a spot, and that's where the story takes place. Well, I'm reading this book, and he's telling in this story that some major giant activity is right there in that region.
Right. Exactly.
In fact, he says that there's a mountain range that where the river is that I have goes to a mountain range, and it's the northwestern side of that mountain range where that the river comes down on that side. But on the other side is where he has what he called Dragon Mountain or something like that. He's talking about the snake dragon or dragon snake or something like that. That's a UFO that is regular. I mean, it pops out every night or every other night or whatever between, I think he said, like 9 p.m. and like 3 a.m., mostly around the 3 a.m. time period. And this thing pops out on the other side of that mountain range, goes down the valley on that side, and then heads out to it's called Iron something Sound. I think it's like Ironside Sound or something like that. Anyway, there's a nickname given to the area of water between the northeastern side of the Guadalcanal and Savo Island. And that's where some major World War II naval battles took place. And there are dozens of ships that sunk out there. Just dozens of them. Japanese, battleships, and I don't know if any aircraft carriers, but submarines, and of course United States and Allied forces lost, British ships and Australian ships and stuff. Like, there's just dozens and dozens of ships went down in that general area. And he was saying that the UFO regularly leaves this mountain. There's a waterfall that comes down from the higher part of the mountain into a small lake, and the UFOs come out of the lake, so they're not extraterrestrial. They're under the earth, subterranean UFOs, come out, go down this valley, and then go out, and they dip down into the ocean where all those shipwrecks were. And they do something down there for an unspecified amount of time, and then they pop back up and go back into the mountain. And that's where I am in the story right now, is he was describing his adventures and documenting all that, going out there, climbing the mountain and watching it. I'm looking at this location. I'm like, oh, man, this is like right on the other side of the mountain where my lieutenant crashed. So now I'm going, oh boy, like like I've got what I thought was just going to be a little simple story to set up one of my main characters' father's background is now going to be like a lot more expanded.
Oh yeah, I mean, and there's so much to that there. He even describes how there was a woman that was abducted. And lived amongst the giants for 5 years and then escaped. And he went and interviewed her, and she did share somewhat of her story, but I mean, those kind of experiences are happening now, modern times. So
yeah,
it's pretty amazing.
For people who are wondering what we're talking about, they could go on Amazon and just look up Solomon Island Mysteries, accounts of giants and UFOs in the Solomon Islands. Paperback, looks like an update was February 15, 2010. So, I mean, it's a recently published book with recent explorations and testimonies. Wow. I know what I'm going to be reading on the plane to South Africa.
Right. Right on.
That'll be my reading.
Yeah, it's easy reading too, so you can get through it pretty quick.
It is very easy reading. It's like a detective story basically.
Right.
This guy's just telling what is, because he lived in Australia and he married a woman from the Guadalcanal, I guess, island of the Solomon Islands, and he got married into that culture and then very quickly started to hear the stories. And I'm on that chapter. I just started reading about that woman that was that everybody knew about, that had been abducted and taken by the giants. And so you Sethite people out there, you've got no explanation for any of that. And these are huge giants too. I mean, because he said there's 3 classes of giants there. There's sort of the hairy, like Bigfoot type class that's not terribly big, maybe 9 feet tall. But then he's talking about like 20 and high 20 and maybe even 30 footers. And he's got some charts that he shows where like the center of that island is like major giant territory.
Right.
And
they don't even go into the interior. Yeah. Because that's all giant territory. Yeah, they live on the outskirts.
Yeah, the southern eastern outskirts is where the primary population of people are. Right. Although Henderson Field, which was where a big part of the World War II battle between the United States and Japan took place, they were trying to secure Henderson Field. That's not too far down the northeastern coast from the area where the UFOs were heading out. So, yeah, man, just crazy cool stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
All right. Well, let's dive in here then. Let me switch over to the Bible first. Genesis chapter 5 was what we were looking at last week, and specifically talking about the days of Enos, and then we continued on down to where Enoch was born, and then on Genesis 5:23, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. Any thoughts on the 365 before we jump away?
No, because I know a lot of people believe that is connected to, like in some manner, the year or the passing of the 365 days of a solar year. But in my opinion, Enoch, in the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, and even in Second Enoch, I believe that the 365-day reference in that book is something that was mistranslated and changed, because Enoch mentions and describes a 364-day solar year. And so I'm not exactly sure as to that particular. And it would be interesting to see, but I don't know, because I don't believe it's heliocentric, because Enoch was not heliocentric in any manner, and the solar year, according to him, was 364 days, with the 30 days of the 12 months of the year, and then the equinoxes and the solstices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Just wondering what your thoughts might be on that. Yeah. Now, as we've talked about in previous broadcasts, neither Zen nor I consider the book of Jasher to be canon or necessarily inspired. However, it is clear that the people in the Bible, the Holy Spirit-inspired authors of the canonized text, certainly held the book of Jasher in high regard. I kind of liken it to the way most scholars would recognize Josephus as a recognizable first century historian that can help validate the stories in the Scripture, particularly the New Testament, but also he gives, from his perspective, an elaboration on the Old Testament Scriptures. I kind of see the book of Jasher as maybe an authoritative text that they looked at that way, because it means true and upright. The book of Jasher would mean the true and upright account, essentially, if you were to translate the title of the book. This book right here, for those who can see on YouTube, the book of Jasher, the J.H. Perry text in modern English, edited by Joseph Lumpkin. In this book, he talks about the history of this particular translation, or this particular version of Jasher. I guess there's several others out there, tracing it all the way back to 70 A.D. And by implication, if there was a scribe that had this scrolls in 70 A.D., those would be copies, obviously, that we may be able to take it back even further, because, so the story goes, Ptolemy wanted the Hebrews under his jurisdiction to tell him about their gods and to provide their scriptures for him, and they didn't want to give this pagan king their Torah, so they gave him the book of Jasher. And he checked out the book of Jasher and found out that they were holding out on him, so he demanded, no, I want this Torah of your prophet Moshe. And so the Septuagint was written because of the book of Jasher. So it seems to me we can trace this back at least as far back to the days of Ptolemy, and if we can get that far back, I have no reason to believe that it's not the same book that they're talking about throughout Scripture when they're referencing it.
Right.
And so it resurfaced in the Middle Ages. People tell you that the Jasher is a medieval forgery. And I would say, nah, I think they just found it again in Sevilla, Spain, as I understand the story, is where they found it, and then it came into public view again, and eventually was translated into English, into the copy that we have here today. I also published it in a book called Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Text, in all in one volume. So you have the book of Genesis in the Septuagint and King James, together with the complete text of 1st Enoch, Jasher, and Jubilees. People can check that out if they're interested on Amazon. But for tonight's broadcast, I'm going to read from my virtual house church. I have it posted there, so if anybody wants to follow along with me, they could go to virtualhousechurch.com, and in the main menu on the left, click on Genesis Week 1, the Genesis study, and scroll down. You'll read, there's all kinds of videos and stuff talking about biblical cosmology now on that page, because it's all on Genesis 1. And then getting into the genealogies and stuff like that. Jasher 1 and 2, of course, gives an elaborated version on the stuff that we've already covered here on this series that we're doing. So I'll just skip down to Jasher Chapter 3. And let's see if I can enlarge this a bit, make it easier to read. There we go. Okay, Jasher 3. And Enoch lived 65 years, and he begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after having begot Methuselah, and he served the Lord, and despised the evil ways of men. And the soul of Enoch was wrapped up in the instruction of the Lord, in knowledge and in understanding, and he wisely retired from the sons of men, and secreted himself from them for many days. And it was at the expiration of many years, whilst he was serving the Lord and praying before him in his house, that an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and he said, Here am I. And he said, Rise, go forth from thy house, and from the place where thou dost hide thyself, and appear to the sons of men, in order that thou mayest teach them the way in which they should go, and the work which they must accomplish to enter in the ways of God. And Enoch rose up according to the word of the Lord, and went forth from his house, from his place, and from the chamber in which he was concealed, and he went to the sons of men, and taught them the ways of the Lord, and at that time assembled the sons of men, and acquainted them with the instruction of the Lord. And he ordered it to be proclaimed in all places where the sons of men dwelt, saying, Where is the man who wishes to know the ways of the Lord and good works? Let him come to Enoch. And all the sons of men then assembled to him, For all who desired this thing went to Enoch, and Enoch reigned over the sons of men according to the word of the Lord, and they came and bowed to him, and they heard his word. And the Spirit of God was upon Enoch, and he taught all his men the wisdom of God and his ways, and the sons of men served the Lord all the days of Enoch, and they came to hear his wisdom. And all the kings of the sons of men, both first and last, together with their princes and judges, came to Enoch when they heard of his wisdom, and they bowed down to him, and they also required of Enoch to reign over them, to which he consented. And they assembled in all 130 kings and princes, and they made Enoch king over them, and they were all under his power and command. And Enoch taught them wisdom, knowledge, and the ways of the Lord. And he made peace amongst them. And peace was throughout the earth during the life of Enoch. And Enoch reigned over the sons of men 243 years, and he did justice and righteousness with all his people, and he led them in the ways of the Lord. And these are the generations of Enoch: Methuselah, Elisha. Oop, going to break.
That was quick.
Yeah, it was.
It's amazing how people have been raving about ILife all over Facebook. They've been posting their testimonials just because they want to get the word out because it's worked so well for them. If you're not familiar with ILife, it's a 99% pure CBD oil, but the secret is the synergy between the hemp and the ayahuasca vine, the non-psychoactive component of the ayahuasca tea. We recently received an email from a wife whose husband has Parkinson's. For the first time, he's been able to sleep through the entire night. Another customer reported that they're no longer using NSAIDs because their tennis elbow has been relieved with ILife. The reports have been phenomenal and much more than we ever expected. Everyone should have access to this. That's why if you head on over to ILife.com right now and use coupon code TFR, we'll give you $5 towards your order. And we'll even ship it worldwide. That's ILife.com, AYA life.com.
Hey folks, guess what the #1 phrase that Life Change Tea receives by email? You ready? We love this tea! We love this tea! Time after time, week after week, we love this tea! Life Change Tea gives you more energy, a beautiful cleansing, and fulfills its slogan perfectly. The tea that makes you go. So if you want to be on your health game, log on to getthetea.com and order Life Change Super Strength Tea. Packages come in a 1-month supply, and when you brew this stuff, wait until you see the results. Aren't we all about the results? And with a lot of people's health struggling, we can use a little bit of help. Doctors will tell you disease starts in the gut. So log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Be our next email saying, I love this tea. I love this tea. Get the tea at getthetea.com. Helping America one tea bag at a time.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Sargent from Strange World, broadcasting live every Tuesday evening, 10 to 12 Eastern, 7 to 9 Pacific, right here on True Frequency Radio. Strange World covers a wide range of topics, from enclosed world theory to lunar waves to the end of the world in film. It's basically doomsday with a silver lining. With the audience as my co-host, we take an optimistic approach to all things conspiracy and promote confidence, hope, and humor whenever possible. If there's a topic you want us to cover or a guest you would like to see interviewed, please email me at msargent23@comcast.net. So please join me and tell your friends about Truth Frequency Radio, the leader in real radio programming, bringing you quality, cutting-edge broadcasts from around the world.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and we are doing our study of the book of Genesis, and we've shifted gears a little bit to jump into Jasher Chapter 3 to elaborate on Genesis Chapter 5, where it says, Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. Why did God take him? Well, the book of Jasher helps to fill in the details, so we'll pick up where we left off, unless you want to add anything to anything that we've said so far, Zen?
No, but I did have a really quick announcement. My daughter-in-law wanted us to mention that this week is the last week for the early bird special on the Sacred Word Revealed conference that Rob and I will both be speaking at, along with Gary Wayne, Dr. Joy Jeffries-Pugh, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Yana and Stephen Ben-Noon, Laurel Austin, and my son Justin James Garcia. And so that will be March 27th through the 29th here in Atlanta, but you can go to sacredwordrevealed.com, and like I said, the tickets up until the end of this month are on discount, so just to let people know.
Yeah, very good. You want to take advantage of that? This is going to be an exciting conference. Can't wait. That's going to be fun.
I think so as well.
All right, very good. Well, I started. It looks like I think I was on verse 13. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just start from the beginning of 13 again. And these are the generations of Enoch: Methuselah, Elisha, Elimelech, 3 sons, and their sisters were Melka and Naamah. And Methuselah lived 87 years, and he begat Lamech. And it was in the 56th year of the life of Lamech when Adam died. 930 years old was he at his death, and his 2 sons with Enoch and Methuselah his son buried him with great pomp, as at the burial of kings, in the cave which God had told him. Is that the cave of treasures?
Yes,
where he was buried?
It is.
Man, that's tempting to jump over in the book of Adam and Eve right now.
Right.
Maybe we'll hold off on that, but yeah, maybe we could visit that later, because what a text that is, huh?
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and in that place all the sons of men made a great mourning and weeping on account of Adam. It has therefore become a custom among the sons of men to this day. And Adam died because he ate of the tree of knowledge, he and his children after him, as the Lord God had spoken. And it was in the year of Adam's death, which was the 243rd year of the reign of Enoch. In that time Enoch resolved to separate himself from the sons of men, and to secret himself as at first, in order to serve the Lord. And Enoch did so, but did not entirely secret himself from them, but kept away from the sons of men 3 days, then went to them for 1 day. And during the 3 days that he was in his chamber, he prayed to and praised the Lord his God. And the day on which he went, he appeared to his subjects and taught them the ways of the Lord, and all they asked him about the Lord he told them. And he did in this manner for many years, and he afterward concealed himself for 6 days, and appeared to his people 1 day and 7. And after that once in a month, and then once in a year, until all the kings, princes, and sons of men sought for him, and desired again to see the face of Enoch, and to hear his word, but they could not, as all the sons of men were greatly afraid of Enoch, and they feared to approach him on account of the godlike awe that was seated upon his countenance. Therefore no man could look at him, fearing he might be punished and die. That's an interesting passage, because that's similar to Moses, who, when he would spend time with God on the mountain, came back and his countenance was glowing. And I think that speaks to the phosphorescent nature of us, that the way we originally were created when we were in the image and likeness of God. We had a light suit, a glow.
Right.
But apparently there's still a very minor portion of that still exists in our DNA. With certain types of microscopes and stuff, you can look at blood cells and stuff, for instance, and it will have like a glow to it.
Yes, right.
In fact, there's some interesting technology that we've become introduced to called Beamer. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's this technology that basically aligns the body electromagnetically. And you ever see blood samples where the blood cells are all clumped together? You ever see like a microscopy, like my own blood? I did a video on it. Did you ever see like that? blood under a microscope where all the blood cells are all crammed together in like these traffic jams?
Oh yeah, yep.
Well, you lay on this thing and like it charges all the blood cells and they separate, and so they can actually do what they're meant to do.
Wow, that's amazing.
And like athletes use it to, because if the cells are able to do what they're supposed to do, then of course they bring the proper nutrients where they're supposed to go, and oxygen where it needs to go, and everything else. And athletes that use this beamer technology, really see massive improvement, and people with all kinds of ailments and stuff see all kinds of healing and improvement and stuff. But I've seen different microscope where they would test somebody's blood on this thing, before they get on it, and it's all clumped up like my blood was when I did a microscopy.
Traffic jam.
Yeah, all traffic jam. And then they would beam the person and then retest them, and the blood's just it's opened up, all the capillaries opened up, the blood's moving, it's getting where it needs to go, and all kinds of healing starts taking place and stuff like that. But the freakiest thing that I heard about was sort of like this quantum entanglement deal, where they did an experiment, as I understand it, and they took a person's blood, looked at it under a microscope, it was all clumped up and real nasty and stuff, and they put that sample in another room, or they put the person in another room. Maybe I think the person went in another room and did the beamer thing, and the blood in the other room reacted.
Wow.
To it, so real interesting stuff. I think people like Rife understood this.
Yes.
Rife technology, that we do have this sort of this energy aura about us, but it's so subdued now. I mean, you got to look at it with specialized equipment.
Right.
But you get in the presence of God, and it lights it all back up again.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, Moses got beamed up pretty good, just from like 40 days.
Right.
Can you imagine what Enoch must have looked like after?
Right, years and years and years.
And he would go from months at a time, weeks at a time, months at a time, and then it got to where it's like he'd spend one day with men and the rest of the time with God.
God, yeah, how amazing.
I could imagine they were afraid of him when he came back.
Right.
He's like,
yeah.
Fearing him, fearing he might be punished and die. People really freaking out about him. Any thoughts on that before I continue on the luminescence issue?
Well, yeah, I think that, again, it reflects even how they try to, in old medieval, they would, do the halos to kind of show the blessings and the anointings that are on the apostles and the saints. That I think that, there's something to being righteous and being under the blessings and protection of the Most High God. And certainly evil should fear, those that are anointed, because they have the power to trample on scorpions and snakes and all the powers of darkness. So, yeah I definitely think some, and the whole bright nature, as far as our original state and our former bright nature glory, and how that will be returned to that. So.
Yeah, somebody in the chat room said, I want to shine. Yeah, me too.
Yes, exactly.
And, Paul talks about that there's going to come a time where we're transformed in the twinkling of an eye.
Right.
Right. I think we're going to get our glorified bodies back at that time. And I like the way Doug Hamp described that one time, is like we can't be in his presence in this meat suit the way we are.
Right.
His
can't handle it.
Yeah, I mean, he is such a powerful being, enormous power and energy coming out of him that we would just disintegrate, in front of him. And we need the blood of Christ on us to be our shield, to be able to swim, if you will, in that environment without it destroying us.
Yes, bask in his glory.
It's going to be an awesome day right there.
Amen.
All right, verse 21. And all the kings and princes resolved to assemble the sons of men and to come to Enoch, thinking that they might all speak to him at the time when he should come forth amongst them, and they did so. And the day came when Enoch went forth, and they all assembled and came to him, and Enoch spoke to them the words of the Lord, and he taught them wisdom and knowledge, and they bowed down before him, and they said, "May the king live! May the king live!" And in some time after, when the kings and princes and the sons of men were speaking to Enoch, and Enoch was teaching them the ways of God, behold, an angel of the Lord then called unto Enoch from heaven, and wished to bring him up to heaven, to make him reign there over the sons of God. Sons of God? Angels.
Yes.
As he had reigned over the sons of men upon the earth. So we have a reference in the book of Jasher. I actually never saw that before, just now. To the sons of God directly as a phrase meaning angels.
Right.
I want to look at that one more time. And in some time after, when the kings and princes and the sons of men were speaking to Enoch, and Enoch was teaching them the ways of God, behold, an angel of the Lord then called unto Enoch from heaven, and wished to bring him up to heaven, to make him reign there over the sons of God, as he had reigned over the sons of men upon earth. I wonder, do you think that may be the transition period to where the book of Enoch picks up?
I think so. And also with regard to, I know that a lot of people don't give credence to the third book of Enoch, which is a Hebrew text, and I'm not saying in any manner that it's anointed or inspired, but it does give the story of Enoch being transformed into the angel Metatron, which is something that is spoken about in the Targum account of Enoch as well. And so, who knows, is that truthful? Is there some veracity to that? And was Enoch, but I think with regard to before he was taken, because I think that when he was taken and transformed into the angel Metatron, that this is when he disappeared from amongst, the sons of men here on the earth. But that there was a transition time, because we know that during this time, everybody reigned in peace, all the sons of men. But then the Watchers descending and creating a race of giants, they became cannibals, and they started to wage war against humanity, to consume everything, to destroy everything. The earth cried out that would be the time before his departure. And that's when, God told him that they should pray for men and not men pray for them. And then we see that the book of giants and everything was, and this was leading up to the flood. And it's my opinion that because it speaks about in the writings of Abraham that the city of Enoch, like the entire city of Enoch and the people that were righteous amongst them, that they were taking up, and that this was also what became New Jerusalem. And whether that's, truthful or not, I don't know as well, but there are allusions to that in other extra biblical texts. And so that because the righteous disappeared leading up to the flood, and then it was only Noah with his 8 righteous people, and him being the only one pure in his generations, that God brought the flood after Methuselah died 7 days thereafter, time of mourning for him. And then the windows of heaven opened up, the fountains of the deep, and God flooded out this whole snow globe. So yeah.
Okay, let's go over to verse 24. When at that time Enoch heard this, he went and assembled all the inhabitants of the earth, and taught them wisdom and knowledge, and gave them divine instructions. And he said to them, I have been required to ascend into heaven. I therefore do not know the day of my going. And now therefore I will teach you wisdom and knowledge, and will give you instruction before I leave you, how to act upon earth, whereby ye may live. And he did so. And he taught them wisdom and knowledge, and gave them instruction, and he reproved them, and he placed before them statutes and judgments to do upon earth. And he made peace amongst them, and he taught them everlasting life, and dwelt with them sometime, teaching them all these things. And at that time the sons of men were with Enoch, and Enoch was speaking to them, and they lifted up their eyes, and the likeness of a great horse descended from heaven, and the horse paced in the air. And they told Enoch what they had seen, and Enoch said to them, On my account does this horse descend upon earth. the time is come when I must go from you, and I shall no more be seen by you. And the horse descended at that time and stood before Enoch, and all the sons of men that were with Enoch saw him. And Enoch then again ordered a voice to be proclaimed, saying, Where is the man who delighteth to know the ways of the Lord his God? Let him come this day to Enoch before he is taken from us. And all the sons of men assembled and came to Enoch that day. And all the kings of the earth with their princes and counselors remained with him that day. And Enoch then taught the sons of men wisdom and knowledge, and gave them divine instruction. And he bade them serve the Lord and walk in his ways all the days of their lives. And he continued to make peace amongst them. And it was after this that he rose up and rode upon the horse. And he went forth, and all the sons of men went after him, about 800,000 men. Wow, 800,000 men. And they went with him 1 day's journey. And the second day he said to them, Return home to your tents. Why will you go? Perhaps you may die. And some of them went from him, and those that remained went with him 6 days' journey. And Enoch said to them, Every day return to your tents, lest you may die. But they were not willing to return, and they went with him. And on the 6th day some of the men remained and clung to him, and they said to him, We will go with thee to the place where thou goest, as the Lord liveth, death only shall separate us. And they urged so much to go with him, that he ceased speaking to them, and they went after him, and would not return. And when the kings returned, they caused a census to be taken, in order to know the number of remaining men that went with Enoch. And it was upon the 7th day that Enoch ascended into heaven in a whirlwind with horses and chariots of fire. And on the 8th day all the kings that had been with Enoch sent to bring back the number of men that were with Enoch in that place from which he ascended into heaven. And all those kings went to the place, and they found the earth there filled with snow, and upon the snow were large stones of snow. And one said to the other, Come, let us break through the snow and see. Perhaps the men that remained with Enoch are dead, and are now under the stones of snow. And they searched, but could not find him, for he had ascended into heaven. Enoch disappeared in a place of snow?
Yeah, interesting, huh?
And he did so on the 8th day. Hadn't really considered this until just now, but do you think that might have been at the end of Sukkot?
Could very well be. There's also a mention of the 8th day in the book of Enoch, that there are these 7,000 years in a day as 1,000 years. You have the 6,000 years of the 120 jubilees of the Second World Age, then 1,000 years of the millennial reign, and then they say, Enoch says, in the 8th day thereafter, which is an eternal age. And so could be connection to that. How God always tries to show connections with rituals and to things that occur, and there's cycles that happen like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, I didn't think of it until just now reading it, but we know that they were keeping the feasts before Moses was given,
absolutely.
Before Leviticus 23. Many accounts, from the acts of Cain and Abel to the dating and the timing of the flood, and when they got out of the ark, and the different things. Like, there were different observances of the Moedim, the appointed times of Yahuwah, that were taking place in the pre-flood world long before Moses showed up, 800 or so years after the flood.
Right.
So it does make me wonder, it may be something worth paying attention to as you look into other texts that may elaborate on this narrative, perhaps, to see if that would have been during a time of Sukkot, and on the 8th day he was taken out. That would be interesting.
It seems, again, because I believe that with the second coming of Christ, that the fulfillment of, as far as the that he will come on the Feast of Trumpets, but then that he will take the judgment seat on the Day of Atonement, and that for those that are worthy, New Jerusalem will descend down on Sukkot as well. So it would make sense to me that Enoch would, leave on that particular day as well, because that's when New Jerusalem will return at the end of days. So
Yeah. And so we see here in this Enochian account in the book of Jasher that he's taken up the same way Elijah was.
right.
So I think that's probably why many people speculate and believe that the two witnesses in the last days are going to be Enoch and Elijah, which is a view I lean towards myself. Although there's another view that I've recently come to believe, if I let Scripture interpret itself, that it would be Yeshua, not Yeshua our Savior, but a high priest named Yeshua and Zerubbabel. And that came as a result of doing a study where I was like, okay, I want to go through all the prophetic scriptures I could find, and I created a Excel spreadsheet with a column on the left of Old Testament end times prophecies, and a column on the right for New Testament end time prophecies, and I wanted to line, whenever I could find correlations, pair them up. And where I'm reading in Revelation, I believe it's chapter 11, where it talks about the two witnesses, and John is being shown some things in heaven. He's like, what are these? And he said, well, these are the two witnesses, and the lampstand and this that stand in front. I forget the exact narrative, but I had just put, I think it's Ezekiel 40, if I remember the address correctly, in the left-hand column, and had seen that the description that's given for Yeshua, the high priest, and Zerubbabel, is identical to the description given in the book of Revelation. Like, you put them side by side, it's like it's identical. And in the narrative, John is told after that, he says, he's given a measuring stick, and he says, go and measure the temple, but don't measure the outer courtyard, because it's been given over to the Gentiles. So we see that in the book of Revelation, and then in the same narrative in Ezekiel, the prophet's sitting there, and he sees this guy go running by with a measuring stick, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm going to go measure the temple. And it gives you all the dimensions of the temple in height, depth, and width, except for the outer courtyard. The only dimension you get in that description is the distance between the two gates, but it doesn't give you dimensions like it does everything else. So I'm going, what? Ezekiel is seeing John, like, okay, so John went back in time to do something that would be for our future, and Ezekiel seeing a dude from his future that went back from his time to write about our time. I'm going, there's time travel in the Bible, like right here.
Right, yeah.
And so I'm kind of 50-50 as to who the two witnesses are. I like the Enoch and Elijah idea, and we know that it talks about Elijah coming back. And I have no problem believing that he could come back and still be two other witnesses. I don't see a conflict there. But one of the things that comes up a lot is where Yeshua says no one has been to seeing the Father except for him. And so I've seen stuff, even in the Bible, that shows that Ezekiel didn't really get taken to heaven. Elijah didn't really get taken to heaven, but he was taken to another place, because he shows up again in a later text. I forget all the addresses and stuff on that, but so some people say that Elijah wasn't really taken. He was taken away, but it may have been like a Philip scenario, where Philip was there with the Ethiopian eunuch, and then he gets transported someplace else. That may have been what happened to Elijah, and if that's the case with Elijah, then perhaps the same thing happened to Enoch, or perhaps maybe both of these guys made it to the edge, and there's something beyond that. That, so maybe not making it to the top of the dome, but making it to the edge of the dome, and there may be a holding area of some sort on the other side of the dome, like the Flammarion or whatever engraving. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but the engraving of the prophet looking under the dome. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Flammarion or something like that. But
yeah.
So anyway, what are your thoughts on the parallels of Elijah and Enoch and all that?
Yeah, there's a passage here in the writings of Abraham that I looked up. It says that the remainder of the righteous had died or been caught up into Enoch city prior to the time of the flood, and these 8 were saved. It continues to speak about how this city was taken up, and this again became New Jerusalem. And in my opinion, New Jerusalem is the paradise spoken about above the vaulted dome of the earth. And what is interesting with regard, and I do believe that Enoch and Elijah are the two witnesses, because there are literally dozens of manuscripts which allude to that, and I can share them all with you at some point, but both of them are described as two witnesses at the end of days that are killed in the streets of New Jerusalem, Jerusalem here on the earth, by the Antichrist during the Great Tribulation. But what is also interesting about them not having died is that when Christ dies on the cross and he sends the thief to be in paradise, he sends him to wait for him to enter before he can enter into paradise. And then when he resurrects Adam...
Hold that thought.
We'll pick it up on the other.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm 10 years old. I'm one of the millions of children born to parents suffering from the sheeple virus. Symptoms include the inability to think for oneself, the attention span of a goldfish, and a strong belief in government and the mainstream media. It is estimated that 1 out of every 2 children are being raised by parents infected with the sheeple virus. But there is a cure. For as little as 19 cents per day, you can become a TFR supporter and help children like me get their daily dose of truth. Together, we will make sure every child has protection from deception.
Timeline, Texas explosions. I'm Elliot Francis. Published reports claim President Trump had been briefed on the whistleblower complaint that's now at the heart of the House impeachment inquiry. Costantini reports.
The New York Times is reporting that in late August, President Trump was aware of the initial whistleblower complaint about his phone call with Ukraine's new president, and within days unfroze the military aid money of nearly $400 million. Citing 2 sources, the report says aides were trying to determine if the complaint needed to be forwarded to Congress. But the whistleblower had apparently already had contact with staff of the House Intelligence Committee, chaired by Adam Schiff, regarding how to file a complaint. Eventually, the White House released the whistleblower report and a rough transcript of the president's call with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, now at the center of the impeachment probe. Bob Costantini, Washington.
More than 4,000 airline flights were delayed ahead of Thanksgiving. 2 storm systems have now complicated travel across the U.S. Rough weather is expected to impact post-Thanksgiving travel as well. Meanwhile, the northbound lanes of I-5 in California have reopened, heading from Redding all the way to the Oregon border. Transportation officials say the freeway is clear, no chains required. 2 massive explosions 13 hours apart tore through a Texas chemical plant Wednesday, leaving 3 workers injured. Troy Monk, Director of Health, Safety, and Security for the plant, acknowledges that damage done to the surrounding area was bad.
We do recognize that we did impact a lot of folks off-site, and there's obviously been reported damage, physical damage to residencies, glass broken, doors jammed in their frames, etc. Some of the impacts have even displaced residents. So we're working diligently with our insurance provider.
China's foreign ministry says it'll take firm countermeasures if the U.S. continues to interfere in Hong Kong. It called legislation signed by President Trump backing Hong Kong as a serious interference.
Wherever you are, make it Truth Frequency Radio.
back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and this evening we are talking about the book of Jasher, the Jasher account of Enoch in Jasher Chapter 3, to help explain what was going on in Genesis Chapter 5, where it says Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. During the break, I went and looked up the stuff I was talking about. I know you got cut off, so I want you to be able to continue where you left off. But before we go there, I want to correct some of the things that I was saying before. It's been a long time since I looked at it, so I didn't have all my references right, but looked it up real quick. In Revelation chapter 11, it says, "And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angels stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth." Okay, this is key right here. Revelation 11:4. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. Interesting, in Zechariah Chapter 2, the prophet says, "I lifted up mine eyes again and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand." He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to measure Jerusalem." So, he sees a dude with a measuring stick going to measure. In Zechariah Chapter 2, in Chapter 3, it talks about Joshua or Yeshua, the high priest. I'm not going to go through all this, but people should read Zechariah Chapter 3. Very interesting dialogue concerning this individual and how he is highly esteemed by God here. And then we get to Zechariah Chapter 4, and this is where it's talking about Zerubbabel. And let's see, I'll start with verse 8. Zechariah Chapter 4. "Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of his house. His hands shall also finish it. And thou shalt know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me unto you. For who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice, and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel with those 7. They are the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro throughout the earth. Then answered I, and said unto him, What are these 2 olive trees upon the right side of the candlestick, and upon the left side thereof?" Remember what Revelation 11:4 said, 2 olive trees and 2 candlesticks stand before the Lord of the earth. And he answered me and said, Knowest thou not what these be? And I said, No, my Lord. And then said he, These are the 2 anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. And Ezekiel Chapter 40, I wonder if there was something in Chapter 5 that I want to maybe pick up on. That's the flying scroll. That's an interesting situation there. The flying scroll and the woman inside of it named Wickedness. So there's that, and then Ezekiel 40 is where he sees a guy running out. It says, "And he brought me thither, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with a line of flax in his hand and a measuring reed, and he stood in the gate. And the man said unto me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes, and hear with thine ears, and set thine heart upon all that I shall shew thee, for to the intent that I might shew them unto thee art thou brought thither or hither. Declare all that thou hast seen in the house of Israel." And he goes and measures everything, and he gets all these dimensions, except for when you get to the outer courtyard, where you only get the distance between the 2 gates. So I'm convinced that both Zechariah and Ezekiel were seeing John going back in time to measure this deal, but it's the description of the 2 olive trees and 2 candlesticks, and I forget where it was that likened those 2 to. I skipped through this really quick, but it's something to do with Zechariah Chapter 3 and 4, anyway, which was the conclusion that I came to, using the text itself to interpret itself. But you're right, there are lots of people and ancient writings that point blank tell you that the 2 witnesses in the last days are Enoch and Elijah. But you got cut off before the break, so if you remember where you left off, you can go ahead and continue. And any comments on what I just said as well?
Yeah. Well, of course, we don't know for certain. Only God knows for certain. But I just go by all the different ancient manuscripts, and the whole principle of out of the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the truth be established. And so where I see multiple confirmations, and that's tend to be where I lean with regard to truth. But with regard to the city of Enoch that I had made mention of, there's a passage here which talks. Well, I'll just read it, and then it says, "With his power he had set out to build a tower which would reach to heaven, even the city of my father Enoch, which had been taken up, that he, Nimrod, might depose God from his throne, for God had taken up his abode among the people of Enoch." There's another passage here that speaks about Noah. Noah was the son of Lamech, the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, who was taken up with his city, that they might minister unto those in the flesh who sought a higher law than was available to them on the earth. And so, that's why I believe that when Enoch was translated, that possibly this city of Enoch was also taken, and that this is what we now know to be
That's an
New
interesting
Jerusalem. And there's another, I'll share this, because this gives confirmation that when Christ...
But that's a huge city. I mean, if New Jerusalem was the city of Enoch, that's just a massive... I mean, I forget the exact dimensions. Something like 1,500 miles, on each side of the base of it. Whether it be a pyramid or a cube, I think there's good arguments for either one. I lean towards pyramid shape.
Yeah, I do.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
But that would be interesting if it was the city of Enoch was a huge. Well, I mean, that would just be massively huge, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think that the city of Enoch that was taken from here is the entirety of what is now.
Oh, you think it might be
Jerusalem?
Inside of it?
Yeah, I think it's just a portion, and what because Yeshua says, "I go now to prepare a place before you, and I will come again." So he's the one that developed, and I believe that has established New Jerusalem in the manner, the streets of gold, the gates made out of a single stones and precious stones, and a single pearl, that kind of thing. So I don't think that is something that was done by man, but possibly the city of Enoch was a portion, but there's mention of it having been taken along with his people that were righteous and like Enoch translated. But there's another interesting story, and I'll just share one. I've got multiple confirmations of Enoch and Elijah as being the 2 prophets, but in this particular story from the Gospel of Nicodemus, when Christ descends down into Sheol and raises Adam and his descendants to join the thief that had just died on the cross with him, he tells the thief to go and wait outside of paradise, and that when he comes, he'll allow him to enter in with Adam and all those that he would resurrect. And so this is what it says in the Gospel of Nicodemus of this event. "But the Lord, holding the hand of Adam, delivered him unto Michael, the archangel, and all the saints followed Michael, the archangel, and he brought them all into the glory and the beauty, the grace of paradise. And there met them 2 men, ancients of days, and when they were asked of the saints, Who are ye that have not yet been dead in hell with us, and are set in paradise in the body? Then one of them answering said, I am Enoch, which was translated hither by the word of the Lord. And this that is with me is Elias the Thespite, which was taken up in a chariot of fire. And up to this day we have not tasted death, but we are received unto the coming of Antichrist, to fight against him with signs and wonders of God, and to be slain of him in Jerusalem, and after 3 days and a half to be taken up again alive on the clouds. And as Enoch and Elias spake thus with the saints, behold, there came another man of vile habit, bearing upon his shoulders the sign of the cross, whom when they beheld, all the saints said unto him, Who art thou? For thine thine appearance as of a robber, and wherefore is it that thou bearest a sign upon thy shoulders? And he answered them and said, Ye have rightly said, for I was a robber, doing all manner of evil upon the earth. And the Jews crucified me with Jesus, and I beheld the wonders in the creation which came to pass through the cross of Jesus when he was crucified. And I believed that he was the maker of all creatures and the Almighty King. And I besought him, saying, Remember me, Lord, when thou comest into thy kingdom. And forthwith he received my prayer and said unto me, Verily I say unto thee, this day shalt thou be with me in paradise. And he gave me the sign of the cross, saying, Bear this and go unto paradise. And if the angel that keepeth paradise suffer thee not to enter in, show him the sign of the cross, and thou shalt say unto him, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who now is crucified, hath sent me. And when I had done so, I spake all these things unto the angel that keepeth paradise. And when he heard this of me, forthwith he opened the door, and brought me in, and set me at the right hand of paradise, saying, Lo, now, tarry a little, and Adam, the father of all mankind, will enter in with his children that are holy and righteous, after the triumph and the glory of the ascending up of Christ the Lord that is crucified. And when they heard all these words of the robber, all the holy patriarchs and the prophets said with one voice, Blessed be the Lord Almighty, the Father of eternal good things, the Father of mercies, thou that hast given such grace unto thy sinners, and hast brought them again into the beauty of paradise, and into thy good pastures, for this is the most holy life of the Spirit. Amen. Amen.
People are asking, what were you reading from?
It's the Gospel of Nicodemus. It's a portion called the Testament of Corinthians and Lithianias, who were the two children of Simeon, the high priest, that baptized Christ when he was brought in for circumcision, and his voice was restored. They were resurrected unto life, and it was them that the Pharisees went to get a testimony as to the resurrection of Christ. And them not being able to speak, they wrote down their testimonies, and they matched exactly. And this is what became the portion of the Gospel of Nicodemus called the Descent of Christ into Sheol. Wow. It was preserved by Pontius Pilate in his library.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing text.
So, I mean, it's telling the story of the thief?
Yeah, the thief on the cross that was resurrected with Christ, and how he went to paradise. And then also, because in the first book of Adam and Eve, Christ, the word of the Lord, tells Adam that after 5,500 years, I'm going to be born of your seed line. And then when they kill me, when I die on the cross, I'm going to descend down to Sheol, and then I'm going to gather you and your righteous seed, and I'm going to take you back to paradise and restore you to your former state. And this, indeed, he did, because they were the resurrected first fruits. And in Matthew 23, it talks about the graves of the saints being open, and that many of the dead were seen in the streets of Jerusalem. And Corinthians and Lithianias, they were two of the many, and they were the ones that this text actually came from, because it was their writing this account down that was preserved by Pontius Pilate, as well as the Jews. But they didn't release this material. They even begged Pontius Pilate to hide it and to keep it secret, because they didn't want the people to know that the Christ was truly Savior Messiah.
Wow, that's pretty wild. Have you ever heard of the Arco volume? The Arco volume?
Yeah, I have, and those are some of the other stories. Like Pontius Pilate writes to Tiberius Caesar about the crucifixion of Christ and all the wonders that he saw on that day when he was crucified. The 3 hours of darkness, the earthquakes which swallowed up synagogues and killed many of the Jews that were conspiring the murder of Christ, the veil of the temple being rent, all these different things. Yeah, he wrote about that, and he even gives a physical description, one of the only ones available that describe Christ in his physical appearance as part of that collection.
Yeah. A friend of mine introduced me to that book a long time ago, and it seems like the book of Nicodemus may be in there.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Let me see if I can grab it here for people who are looking on YouTube here. This is the book I'm talking about, the Archo volume, Archko, and the subtitle is, or the archaeological writings of the Sanhedrin and Talmuds of the Jews. Pretty wild stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I'm looking at that text again that I read before, I don't know why I'm not seeing what I saw when I had previously come to the conclusion that it may be Zerubbabel and Yeshua, but as I'm looking at it now, I'm going, well, it seems like that Zechariah is being shown these two individuals, Yeshua, the high priest, and Zerubbabel, in a heavenly context. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the two olive trees or whatever it said have to be Zerubbabel and Yeshua. I don't know. It's just the whole narrative from Zechariah 3 through 5 is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, you're right. There's just a lot of ancient texts as well as commentary throughout the centuries that point to Enoch and Elijah as being the two. It is interesting at the Mount of Transfiguration that it was Elijah and Moses that showed up. So
right.
there are those who believe that Elijah and Moses are the two witnesses.
Yeah, a lot of people actually do.
Mm-hmm.
But again, in reading the extra biblical materials, and maybe when we return from this next break, I can share a couple of others. But there are numerous accounts that, again, out of the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the truth be established.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing Enoch and Elijah, and how they were here, they spoke about they were there when Adam and his descendants arrived into paradise, and they spoke to them about how they had not died because they're going to be the 2 witnesses of Revelation 11 that convict the Antichrist during the end of days, and he kills them because of that. And so that's in Hebrews it tells us that we all live one lifetime and then judgment, and so it would make sense for them to die in that manner to fulfill that prophecy as well. And I want to bring up one other point with regard to the Gospel of Nicodemus, because a lot of people ask me, and they believe that in reincarnation and that we're all cycling through lifetime and bodies. But it's clear to me from the Gospel of Nicodemus and other stories about the descent of Christ into Sheol that Adam and all those up to the thief on the cross that died, there in crucifixion with him, they were all preserved. Well, not the thief, but all the other patriarchs.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't, coming back into the flesh. They weren't
Right.
being reborn.
Good point.
They weren't taken off and taking other embodiments. They were awaiting in Sheol for him as Savior Messiah to redeem them and to rectify the fall and to restore them to their first estate. So, in my opinion, Hebrews tells it one lifetime, then judgment. We're not cycling in and out of flesh embodiment, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I may have shared this story before, but I as a filmmaker and as a corporate events guy, we just kind of say, have camera, will travel.
Yeah.
You got a camera, and people will hire you to do all kinds of stuff. So from weddings to corporate events and whatnot. So, often I would get contracted to, be the guy that's sitting in the back of the room at a conference, and I'm running the camera for all kinds of different events. And one time it was a very new age type of event, and they were all talking about reincarnation. And like the primary thesis that they were going with throughout that conference was deja vu is like proof of past lives. And I'm just doing my job. I'm just videotaping. I keep my mouth shut, and then we all go out to lunch. And I went out to lunch with the speakers, and I was just minding my own business at the end of the table, just kind of eating. And they're all talking. And finally, one of them looks over at me and said, "You've been, hearing the whole thing. You've been, videotaping it. What are your thoughts on this?" I said, "Well, to be honest with you, I think it's a load of crap." They're like, "Why? What do you mean?" I said, "Well, your whole thesis is that deja vu is proof of past life, but I deja vu about things that didn't exist before my birth. Computers and helicopters and things that I work on, and things in my daily life, I deja vu about all the time. But many of these things didn't exist prior to 1969. The types of helicopters and different things and computers and whatnot." So, but I had an interesting discussion actually with Bob Nodell about this after the conference, because we were talking about all this stuff. And what about those people who claim to have vivid memory of past life experience from an ancestor or what have you? And for me, I think that's easily resolved by genetic memory. That there are lots of stories, and I came across all this when I was doing my Archon Invasion Part 2 DVD, the research for that. People who have organ transplants and stuff many times will pick up attributes of the person from which they got the organ. Gifts, talents, abilities. People who had no musical skills whatsoever all of a sudden know how to play the piano like really well, and cravings that they never had before for certain types of food or drink or what have you. Knowing martial arts all of a sudden, just all kinds of stuff. It's like, well, you didn't just transplant tissue then. You transplanted information about that person. And if that information is laid down in DNA, which I believe it is, probably a huge portion of our DNA is dedicated to data storage, that it's very likely then that, let's say you have vivid memories or, flashbacks or what have you of the Revolutionary War, for instance, maybe a traumatic event or something. Well, perhaps you have an ancestor that goes back to that traumatic event, and whatever happened to them, the trauma of that event laid down on the epigenetics of that person and got embedded there as information that was later passed down. For me, I think there's an easy genetic explanation for what people perceive to be understandings of past life, but I definitely do not believe that we are reincarnated. And that's a very good point that you make there, that the people were waiting. They weren't reincarnating. They were waiting in Sheol, in paradise and what have you, down there under the earth. Incidentally, this is something that's so interesting to me also about the biblical cosmology, is that you ask your typical Christian, most people will acknowledge that hell is beneath our feet.
Right.
But where's heaven? If hell is a tangible, localized place that many people in the ancient world claim to have gone down there, there's all kinds of stories about people that go through this Hades experience and then come back on the other side, to talk about it, to see what, experience something, see it, and come back to write about it. And so that if we can believe that hell is a tangible, localized region under our feet, why then do we just want to say heaven's in another dimension somewhere? Which is the only thing you can say if you believe in the spinning heliocentric globular Earth Copernican model, is it has to be some kind of other dimension. But what if it's not? What if the biblical cosmology is consistent as a three-tiered cosmology?
Exactly.
With Hades, hell below, Earth here where we are in the middle, and God sitting right on top of the dome as a tangible, localized being right above our heads.
Amen. Yeah, I absolutely believe, and not only believe, but as far as what the ancient manuscripts teach, that is exactly it. Even Paul speaks about being taken to paradise in the third heaven, and I believe that is what is being referenced. And then stories like this in the Gospel of Nicodemus, and there's another book which gives even greater detail in as far as paradise and the city of God. It's called The Vision of Paul, and it's a elaboration on what Paul makes mention of in 2 Corinthians. And it's interesting that when he's taken up to paradise, he sees paradise full. Enoch and Elijah and Adam and all the rest of the patriarchs that were resurrected during the time of Christ are there when he visits. And so that's an interesting account as well.
Yeah, so I take it then you're of the opinion that in Matthew, that one tiny little verse, where it says when there was when Yeshua died, there was the earthquake, and many of the saints that had gone were, walking around the city. It's like you get this one little, like barely a half a sentence. You're like, what? So I'm of the opinion that, these were the people, the Old Testament people, walked around apparently for an unspecified number of, amount of time. That must have been a pretty interesting thing. I mean, probably a lot of them walking around.
Yeah.
I mean, that had to have been
there were. Yeah. A lot were seen. Mm-hmm.
Other than the Matthew account, are you aware of any other ancient text that addresses that particular event?
Yeah, the Gospel of Bartholomew
boy.
Also covers it in great detail.
Very cool. We got about 30 seconds, so I don't want to get into it now, but when we come back from the break, that'd be a fun story if you've got it handy. Maybe we can touch on that real quick. And then I want to talk about the issue of Enoch as a type of rapture. Some people in the chat room were saying, so I want to address that as well. All right, so it looks like we'll be going to break in about 5 seconds or so. So we'll chat more when we come back.
Extendivite is more than just a heart tonic. Do you have any of these symptoms? Night cramps in the hands and feet. Your arms and legs often go to sleep. On short walks, do your legs get aches and pains? Is your memory worse than it used to be? Ankles that swell late in the day? Has your blood pressure increased lately? If you answered yes to even one of these questions, you may have early warning signs of arterial blockages. Your body is saying that it is time to take Extendivite. These are not the normal signs of aging. They are the warning signs that accompany blocked arteries. Get your Extendivite today. Extendivite is available in capsule or liquid form for just $69.95 for a 2-month supply. To get started, call 1-877-928-8822. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
Poor water quality is a major health issue, and it's only getting worse. Municipalities can't keep up, standards have dropped, and pollutants are increasing. Where does it all end? It ends by keeping the pollutants outside of your home with HydroCare's advanced systems available at Wave Home Solutions. No less than the best purification materials and processes have been developed by HydroCare to provide you with healthy, clean water for drinking, cooking, and showering. HydroCare far surpasses the competition in removing chlorine, odors, iron, lead, chemicals, limescale, and much more. Don't settle for less when it comes to your water. We'll take care of the toughest water problems for you, whether it's from a city or well source. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, call 888-997-WAVE. That's 888-997-WAVE. Or go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
For 5,000 years, the world was ruled with wooden ships by one man. 242 years ago, a small group of free men crafted a new nation built on liberty and freedom. Global elites have been fighting to destroy this new nation called America ever since. Based on actual events, Charm of Favor tells a true story of how they corrupted the election system. They infiltrated federal agencies and murdered witnesses, judges, and even presidents to keep from being caught. Now, the largest and wealthiest crime syndicate the world has ever known has been drawn out of the shadows. They have killed hundreds of Americans and recently attempted to assassinate half our congressmen. Still, they escape arrest through an almost supernatural charm of favor. Read Charm of Favor and be prepared to open your eyes to what may lie just around the corner. Charm of Favor is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are TFR, your protection from deception.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba. For the final half-hour segment of the broadcast, I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia, and we are discussing Genesis chapter 5 and the book of Jasher chapter 3 regarding Enoch and a whole lot of other stuff along the way, as usual, rabbit trailing as the conversation takes us in various directions. You were going to elaborate on the story of the time when Yeshua died and the earthquake and the saints got up and walked around. Was the Gospel of Bartholomew or something you said?
First, I'll read the passage in Matthew to give people a better idea of what we're talking about.
Good idea.
It's Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 and 53. It says, "And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many." Okay, in the Gospel of Bartholomew, there's a portion of the text. Let me find the name. It's called the Book of the Resurrection of Christ by Bartholomew the Apostle. And it's a commentary. It's not exact, like the Gospel of Nicodemus, but it tells you basically the outline of the story. It says, "Joseph of Arimathea buried the body of Jesus. Death came into Amente, the underworld, asking who the new arrival was, for he detected a disturbance. He came to the tomb of Jesus with his 6 sons in the form of serpents. Jesus lay there. It was it says second day, Saturday, with his face and head covered with napkin. Death addressed his son, the Pestilence, and described the commotion which had taken place in his domain. Then he spoke to the body of Jesus and asked, 'Who art thou?' Jesus removed the napkin that was on his face and looked in the face of Death and laughed at him. Death and his sons fled. Then they approached again, and the same thing happened. He addressed Jesus again at some length, suspecting but not certain who he was. Then Jesus rose and mounted into the chariot of the cherubim. He wrought havoc in hell, breaking the doors, binding the demons, Beliar or Melka, and delivered Adam and the holy souls. Then he turned to Judas Iscariot and uttered a long rebuke and described the sufferings which he must endure. 30 names of sins are given, which are the snakes which were sent to devour him. Jesus rose from the dead, and Abaddon, death, and pestilence came back to Amente to protect it, but they found it wholly desolate. Only 3 souls were left in it, those of Herod, Cain, and Judas, according to Paris manuscript. And meanwhile the angels were singing the hymns which the seraphim sing at the dawn of the Lord's day over his body and his blood. Early in the morning of the Lord's day the women went to the tomb. They were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, whom Jesus delivered out of the hand of Satan, Salome, who tempted him, Mary, who ministered to him, and Martha, her sister, Susanna, the wife of Chuza, who had renounced the marriage bed, Berenice, who was healed of an issue of blood. In Capernaum, Leah, the widow, whose son he raised at Nain, and the woman to whom he said, 'Thy sins, which are many, are forgiven thee.' These were all in the garden of Philogene, whose son Simeon Jesus healed when he came down from the Mount of Olives with the apostles." It goes on further, but it's not specific as is that particular story in the Gospel of Nicodemus, but it does make mention of this particular event and that particular happening. There are others that cover it, but not in the manner that the Gospel of Nicodemus does. And the reason that one covers it in great detail, again, is because Simeon's children, the 2 sons of Simeon, Corinthians and Seus, they were resurrected with these apostles. I mean, with the saints, and they were unable to speak, but they wrote down their stories, and they matched exactly, and so they were confirming witness. And it was those 2 stories. One was given to the Jews, but hid the narrative, and the other to Pontius Pilate, who submitted it into that volume, the Arca volume that you made mention of previously.
Wow, there's just so much to look into. So many.
Yeah,
it's fun though. I mean, I enjoy the. It's like a treasure hunt. Finding these things.
Absolutely.
What was a mente or something like that?
A mente, yeah. It's interesting because the underworld is also called a mente in Greek, and also in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. The underworld is called a mente. And it's interesting because, some of these texts make mention of that same thing, which it shows, in my opinion, that Thoth was dealing with what were the demonic entities that were over Amente, because he says that his incorporation and his knowledge came from being enlightened by them. And so,
and the other thing
which he was one of the Atlanteans,
Yeah. The other thing is it mentioned at least death, and I don't remember if it mentioned Hades also, but as physical entities.
Right. Which is interesting because the second death, death and Satan will be cast into the lake of fire and annihilated.
Well, yeah, and it's what is it? The fourth horse of the apocalypse. The rider on it is an entity.
Yes, exactly.
Death is riding on it, and Hades follows. And I always tell people, it's like Hades is not just a place; he's the brother of Zeus.
Right.
They're physical entities.
Yes.
And so that text, did it mention Hades as an entity or just death?
Let me look back again. But Hades is mentioned in the other text. It says here death and pestilence.
Oh.
But in the Gospel of Nicodemus, Hades is mentioned, as an entity within that text. So.
Okay. I'm going to show a chart on the screen for people who are looking with us on YouTube. The issue of Enoch as a type of rapture. I can agree with that in the sense that he's taken up and translated, which is what's going to happen to us.
Right.
We are going to be taken up and translated. But is he a type of pre-trib rapture? I would say absolutely not.
No, I don't believe so either.
No, because if you look at the narrative and the time period, you have Adam and Eve, then Enoch is born, and you have the days of Jared, and that's when what I call the Genesis 6 experiment took place in the 9th Jubilee. And that's when the sons of God mated with the daughters of men and produced hybrid offspring known as the Nephilim, that Enoch, I forget what, chapter 15 maybe, something like that. Anyway, Enoch tells you that the first generation Nephilim would kill each other off within 500 years. And in a massive civil war that the Greeks later stylized into what became known as the Clash of the Titans. And Josephus likens the first generation Nephilim to the Titans of Greek mythology, giving us sort of a second witness there. So Enoch is around for the Clash of the Titans, which would have been quite a tribulation period.
Right.
Absolutely,
yes.
And he goes through that tribulation period with everybody else, all the righteous, everybody's going through it. And then the 500 years are up. The Nephilim, first generation Nephilim, have killed each other off, and then the bad angels that did what they did were judged, bound, and buried. And so we have the death of Adam happens first. Then we have the Aztec or the Mayan calendar stone there, the Aztec calendar stone, the Mayan calendar, that shows up at 3114 BC. First generation Nephilim killed. This is all right around the same time period, within roughly 25 years. All this is happening. The Watchers are judged, bound, and buried, and then Enoch is raptured and taken out for good. Because he's making trips back and forth, as we saw in the book of Jasher.
Yeah.
And eventually, he writes something like 360 something books or whatever, and he passes those on to Methuselah. And actually, Jasher Chapter 4 talks about how Methuselah, sort of takes over after Enoch is taken. And so we still have 700 more years to go to the flood. You know, it's like 600 and I think it was like 678 years or something like that. Because Noah's not even born yet. Noah's born something like 70 years or so after Enoch is raptured. And, of course, we know Noah lived for 600 years before the flood. So all the tribulation happened while everybody's here. So you can't use Enoch as a pre-trib rapture. You can use him as a rapture example, for sure. But you can't use him as a pre-trib rapture example. If anything, he's a post-trib rapture example. And then you got Noah, same thing. Good guys stay, bad guys get wiped away. Then you have Lot, same thing. Good guys stay, bad guys get judged. Then you have the Exodus. Good guys stay, bad guys get wiped away. Who goes first, the wheat or the tare? Tare goes first. So you want to be left behind because the ones that are taken first are going to get burned up.
Right.
You know,
endure till the end.
How can we be overcomers without anything to overcome? I mean, every single example we have in Scripture is of Yahuwah's faithfulness in preserving his saints through tribulation.
Right.
Not taking them out of it, preserving them through it. And this is our place, guys. This is our home. He made this place for us, which means we stay, bad guys go. I think the only reason we do have a rapture, and I believe it's a post-trib, pre-wrath rapture, I personally believe the wrath is in the bowls, because that's what the text says. It says the bowls contain the wrath of God. And the wrath of God are poured out in the bowls on Babylon in one day. So that's at the end of the tribulation period. So that's when I think the rapture happens, that we are taken up. Why? Because the Earth's going to get totally torched. So
exactly.
The
stars come crashing.
Yeah, I mean, the stars coming down. Like, everything's going. This place is getting burned up. So, we're just hovering while judgment takes place, just like Noah hovered, as it was in the days of Noah. So shall it be the coming of the Son of Man. Right? I mean, he rises up above the judgment. You know, and then he's brought back down again, and stays here. Just like what's going to happen to us. We're going to rise up in time for everything to be burned up, and then we're going to come right back down, and then we have the millennial reign of Christ. So I see absolutely no justification of any example in Scripture that we could point to as something that says, see, pre-trib rapture. It's certainly not Enoch.
Right, yeah. I'm in full agreement with you, and everything that, because we put this book together called The Great Commission 3, which is on all the end time apocalypses, and there are literally dozens of manuscripts which talk about the end of days and the last times, and they are all in agreement together. Just as you may mention that the post-trib, pre-wrath pulled out, and then the wrath of God poured out on the wicked, those not written into the books of life. There's even mention in Revelation that this place is burned up. There's a new heaven and a new earth, and it's established before New Jerusalem descends out of the heavens. And it talks about how that destruction is part of preparing the earth for the coming of the Messiah as bridegroom, and that the earth is made pure as a virgin to be receptive for the as a bride, and that evil and sin and all the things are burned up during the stars crashing here to the earth and setting everything ablaze. And so the second book of the Sibling Oracles goes into great detail on that. There's another text which is one of my most favorite. It's called The Revelation of St. John the Theologian, which is a companion text to the Revelation in our Bible, except for it's not written in parable form. It's like like when Christ sent the multitudes away and then explained to them the parable of the tares of the field. The tares are the children of the enemy. The enemy is the devil, and he is the father of the tares. And so no parable, explanation only, and anybody can understand it. So check it out. It's an easy read, The Revelation of St. John the Theologian.
Wow. Is it one of those that you've published somewhere?
Yeah, it is. In the Great Commission 3, we've published all of these apocalyptic texts. I'll actually pull it up, but go ahead and comment on anything that you want to talk about in the interim.
I'm just fascinated by what you said. There's just never enough time in the day, man. so many things to read, to look into. I mean, there is a wealth of information out there for us to go look at, to help us to understand what is written in Scripture. Again, I mean, for me, I'm a chew the meat, toss the bones when it comes to this stuff. It's like, okay, where it agrees with Scripture, great. It elaborates. It helps me to maybe have a greater understanding of what's being said there. Scripture for both of us, I know you would agree. That's our touchstone. That's our rock. That's our foundation.
Absolutely.
Anything that contradicts it, throw it out.
Right.
If it agrees with it, well, okay, cool. It's something we can look into. And so, and the other thing is, a lot of these other texts. I mean, especially texts that are written within the biblical timeline, time period, where people who are written about in the Bible are still around. Because there are other texts that are out there, and even into the couple hundred years after the New Testament time period, after the last of the apostles have gone. I mean, you have disciples of the disciples of Christ that are writing in the hundreds and into the early
70,
into early 200s, I think. I mean, you have various disciples of the disciples, so they're really close to the story. This enables us to understand the Scriptures the way they understood the Scriptures, because we don't take their writings as Scripture, but we can look at it as good commentary, because they're I always say, who is most likely to have the closest to the truth? The person who is closest to the original source information, or the one furthest away from it?
Right.
If you're getting your doctrine from a seminary in the 21st century, sorry, I'm going to go look at what these guys are saying, because they're closer to the original source information.
Absolutely.
Why would I take a quote unquote theologian's commentary over the commentary of somebody that may have been discipled by John, for instance, or some of these other people.
Right. Yeah, let me share, and I do believe you have this. I think I sent you all 3 of the books of the Great Commission, but
yes, I do.
Third,
I believe I do have those. Yeah.
Yeah, the 3rd book of the Great Commission contains these manuscripts: the Apocalypse of Abraham, the Apocalypse of Moses, the 14th vision of Daniel, the Apocalypse of Elijah, the Hebrew Apocalypse of Elijah, the 4th book of Ezra, the Apocalypse of Sirach, the Sibling Oracles, Book 2, the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, the Apocalypse of Baruch, the Apocalypse of Thomas, the Apocalypse of Peter, the 1st and 2nd Apocalypse of James, the Apocalypse of Paul, the Revelation of St. John the Theologian, the 10 Signs of the End of the Age, the Apocalypse of Samuel, the Apocalypse of Zerubbabel, and the Vision of Adaman. And all of those are specific to the end of days and to, I believe, what we are going through and experiencing now. So.
Wow. And I assume all those are available through Sacred Word Publishing?
Yes, Sacred Word Publishing, the Great Commissions, but the first 2 are about the Acts. Like there's one book of Acts, but there are literally dozens of manuscripts of the apostles going forth to do the Great Commission, and the 3rd book is specific on end-time apocalypses. So.
Yeah, very good. So people want to check that out, you go to sacredwordpublishing.com, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
sacredwordpublishing.com. All right, we got about 7 minutes left in this broadcast. I am leaving for South Africa next Friday, so I probably won't be around to do your show on Thursday. We could do another show on Wednesday if you're available. On my show, we could do that. We could pick up where we left off if you're available.
All right, sure. Yeah, let's do it like that.
Okay, so we're changing the schedule up a little bit. Normally we'd be going over to Zen's show next week, but we'll pick up where we left off on my show next Wednesday evening, 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. Then let me look at the calendar here real quick, because I'm going to be gone. I get back on the 17th. 18th, maybe pushing it for me to do a show, but it could probably pick up on your show on the 19th.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's do it like that.
Okay, so that will be the plan then. So there'll be no show on the week of the 9th through the 13th on either one of our... well, you'll probably do your own show of something else, but we just won't be continuing this study. So what do you think, man? Do you think we jump into Enoch on the next show?
Yeah, well, let's cover Genesis 6.
Oh, you want to get to... get all the way up to Genesis 6.
Yeah, let's cover Genesis 6, because I think that would be a perfect entry into the book of Enoch.
Let me. Okay, we got 6 minutes left. Maybe I can get through the rest of Genesis 5 then, because I don't think we finished 5. There's probably not a whole lot left. Well, we got just a few more verses. So we'll wrap up Genesis 5 then. Let me switch that over. Okay, Genesis 5. We ended with verse 24. So picking up verse 25. And Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech, and Lamech lived after he begat. Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son. Again, these guys are waiting a long time and they start having kids.
Right.
And he called his name Noah, saying, "This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord had cursed." And he actually... Jasher goes into quite a bit more detail as far as the naming of Noah. By
Bargum consolation.
Methuselah actually names him. Because he called, I think Lamech called him Menachem or something like that. I'd have to go back and look at it. But there was a different name, and Methuselah's like, yeah, this is going to be the name. So, Methuselah kind of sealed the deal there. Say Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. I always found that interesting. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, so we see that Noah is the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The question is do they all have the same mother? And we've talked about that in previous shows. But any thoughts in 4 minutes on the 777 of Lamech?
I think, the 7 is definitely the number of God, and it shows the sign. It's a sign of completion. The notes on the musical scale, the division of light into a prism, these kind of things, it shows completion. Even the 7,000 years of the Second World Age, things of that nature. If people look up, in numerology, what 7 means, it is, again, the number of completion. And certainly the 3 7s here was the completion for the grace time, because it was after the death. It was Methuselah, right? After the death of Methuselah.
Well, yeah, Methuselah died, and it was 7 days later was the flood. I'm looking at the wall chart of world history here, and it shows that the 777 of Lamech ended 5 years before the flood. So, it could be a case where he was preserved,
right,
from having to go through judgment. If he was actually serving the Lord, and he was, taken out, because at that time, and we'll get into this when we get into Genesis 6. There was a whole lot going on. I mean, the last Genesis 6:3 is largely overlooked by most scholars, I believe. But there's a lot packed into those 120 years leading up to the flood.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so, it may have been an act of mercy. I don't know. Are you aware of any texts that talk about how he died, or what was the means of his death at 777?
I'll look that up. But I'll check. Like the Legends of the Jews, the Perkti Rabbi Eleazar, and others to see what they say about it, and then I'll come with it next time.
Yeah, well, with him dying 5 years before, I mean, there's 115 years of crazy going on there.
Right.
And crazy directly related to our days, because Yeshua said, as it was in the days of Noah, not the days of Jared, as it was in the days of Noah, it would be so it would be the coming of the Son of Man. And that is the time period that we'll see, and we probably can look at Jasher 4:18 and Jubilee 7:24 next week when we get into Enoch and what led to the corruption of all flesh that we see in Genesis chapter 6. It was the creation of hybrids, blending various types of animals with each other, blending with plants, even blending humans with animals. That was the age of chimera.
Right.
And every
miscegenation, the Book of John says.
What's it called?
Miscegenation.
Well, I mean, every culture has depictions of this. In fact, potentially interesting story. Anyway, I think it was last week's Torah portion. It was either last week or the week before. Dealt with the death of Sarah, and Abraham's negotiating with Ephron of the Hittites, and Ephron's name means fawn-like. And later in the book of Jasher, we see an account of a satyr being described.
Yes, right.
A goat from the waist down and a human from the waist up. And I'm going, and if you look at the carvings of the Hittites, they had many carvings of satyrs. So I'm going, wait a minute, was Abraham negotiating with a satyr for the burial plot for Sarah? I don't know, but interesting circumstantial evidence would possibly suggest that he was. But anyway, yeah, we can get into all that next Wednesday. That's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks so much, Zen. Awesome as always.
Yeah, be blessed, brother. We'll talk soon.
Okay, you too. And thank you guys so much for listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project and our quest for truth regarding the book of Genesis. Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.